All right. Deb Falzoi believes all employees deserve dignity and respect at work for well-being. She helps employees define themselves according to their own values. She built a base of more than 10,000 workplace anti-bullying legislation supporters. She's also helped hundreds of abused employees understand their situations, discover their self-worth, and learn how to move on from their toxic work cultures. She's been quoted in numerous media outlets, including Redbook, Forbes, Monster, and Truth Out. She hosts the Screw the Hierarchy podcast, co founded End Workplace Abuse, and co authored the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. Thank you so much, Deb, for agreeing to do this with me today. It's really exciting.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you, Deb. I found your work actually, I think a couple of months ago. I happened to come across a discussion you did with I believe it was a nurse actually, about healthcare violence. And you were having a discussion with her, and that led me to your website and to your podcast. And you just have a wonderful site full of information and a fantastic podcast. It's just you have so much wonderful information out there, and I'm so curious about when did you get started with this, and what made you get started with doing the work that you do, Deb?
Well, thank you for all of that. Yeah, I hope that it's helpful. I got started in this work back in 2007. I found myself being bullied in higher education in Boston. There was a higher up who, instead of having a conversation about, my work, she just started to sabotage, through removing responsibilities, creating this committee that she excluded me from that I should have been included in. And when I spoke up about it, there was, some apology from her, but also retaliation a little bit later, in the form of a false accusation. Her claiming I didn't swap out a news story on the website without permission from this committee when, she had said that the committee's function was otherwise. So it was really clear that this was a bullying situation. I knew that she was bullying other people at the school, all women. Um, but what I didn't realize was going to happen when I reported the issue to, at the time, it was an interim dean of the school, and then HR, that they were really just blowing off, sweeping this issue under the rug. It wasn't until I had found a new job and a new dean came in and I had filled him in on what was happening, also sent a letter to the provost's office. Um, Found out after I left, which, took a few months for me to find a new job, that they actually did something to address this woman's behavior and finally let her go. Um, but for months, a bunch of us were, going to work stressed every day. No, I know that I was, having sleepless nights, ruminating about what was happening, and just went into work thinking like, what landmine am I gonna, you know, deal with today? What is she going to do today? Um, and so I found a professor who had written legislation. He was also in Boston and got involved with that. My background is in marketing and communications. And so I thought, I can do what I can to try to spread awareness about this. Um, and so it's been kind of a roller coaster since. A lot of like, I had no idea even what to call it when I was experiencing it. And then as I got involved with advocacy for the legislation, we were just getting in tons of stories from people who, it really operated like a playbook. These were often high performers who, had targets on their back by often an insecure boss, and
Mm.
the employer, you know once they realized what was happening, which can take a while, because especially when there's gaslighting and you're made to believe that you're the problem, it can take a while to realize, okay, there's a pattern here, and I'm, crossing all my T's and dotting all my I's, and, nothing's changing here. Um, I think I think people have this turning point where they realize this was never about um, my performance, except that my performance may have threatened the insecure bully. This was always about power and control for the bully. Um, and so hearing all of these people's stories made me realize, like, this is something we don't talk about as a culture. We don't, um, I never, the fact that I had, heard the term domestic abuse, but I never heard the term workplace abuse, I think was really problematic. And yet they're the same, or very similar mechanisms, where you have one, insecure person all about power and control, and they really try to break down their target or targets to um, maintain their power and control. So I really wanted to get out there that this is a thing that people, there's of course a lot of shame and blame when people go through a traumatic experience, but I think the more people can see the playbook, just the textbook aspect of this, the easier it is to see these behaviors embedded in a system of oppression, of sexism and racism and, you know, ableism, ageism, heteronormativity, all of these issues that we we can collectively go up against, but are individually are not our problems to bear, except that we're suffering from the consequences of them. So I really wanted to use legislation as a tool to educate people, and um, also give people more rights. I think a big problem with this issue is that we feel betrayed by the bully, and then we feel betrayed by the employer, who is only focused on their own liability and doesn't want to admit harm. They have their legal department in their ear telling them that they can't admit liability, even though there are healthy workplaces actually addressing these issues. I think for the most part, most workplaces are not addressing them. Um, and so people, not only feel betrayed by their employer, but then feel betrayed by our society that says, you know, it's okay that you're being damaged by this like compare situation. We're not gonna, we're not creating a law against this. So we really want to use advocacy not just to fight, against a rigged system that, even in our state houses, um, they're functioning the same way around power that our workplaces are, where it's often top heavy, and they're not incentivized to pass this bill because they want to maintain their own power and not be held accountable for using bullying as a way to maintain their power. So we realize it's a challenge to change the tides, and there's even been a lot of pushback in terms of how the courts are handling anti-discrimination law in the U.S. Um, but if no other reason, we want people to feel validated, and we want them to feel seen, and we want them to understand, like, this is an issue that goes far beyond what you're experiencing day to day, even though that is hugely important and it is all consuming with people who are experiencing it. But it is really a symptom of a society that doesn't puts profit over people time and time again, and um, values some people over others based on stereotypes. So um, that's what got me here, my own personal experience, and being really um, personally upset that I could go through years of education and have great work experience, but ultimately, if a boss is threatened by my performance, or I have my voice carries less social weight because I'm a woman, then I could have my career completely derailed. And I think that's I think it's completely unreasonable that that should be legal, um, you know, just to maintain people's power. So.
Well, Deb, I really appreciate that you made actually the comparison to domestic violence, because that's pretty much, in my experience, exactly what it is. And, uh, you know, I don't have any actual data on this, but I wonder actually if the perpetrators, in many cases of this type of behavior at work, are also doing it in their are also domestic abusers. And so I guess that leads me to ask you then, Deb, how common you find this problem to be.
There have been like numerous studies on this issue, many studies actually. Anywhere from around 25% of working people have experienced this, all the way up to 90% during their careers. I'm trying to think of the source for this, but I think I've recently heard like 70% in a recent poll, or around 70 some experience this during their working career. So, I mean, we definitely know that even if it is a quarter of employees, I mean, these are people, um, you know, self-reporting on it. And they're all of these surveys are asking the question differently and maybe defining workplace bullying differently. But it is widespread. I mean, 1 in 4 versus like 90% of people is a huge amount of people. And it is more common, among, you know, I think it's interesting. There's this great book that I talk about on my podcast called Rights on Trial, that looks at anti-discrimination law in the US and has it been effective since 1964 when it was implemented. And their basic findings are that, you know, these three researchers found that in the early days of the law, there um, there was some traction. The courts focused on impact, and there were more findings of discrimination. And then during the Reagan era, the courts pushed back on it. I don't believe discrimination is actually defined in the law, which is interesting, but um, they raised the threshold to focus on intent of the perpetrator, which is really hard to prove.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you know, it's no wonder that in the US, white men still dominate the power positions, in our US in the workforce. And because of that, you know, anyone who's not in that norm of looking the part of leader or having those power positions is more likely to be bullied. um, you know, you can also look at like a hierarchy in terms of median incomes. And if, you know, of course, the people that we see at the bottom are expected in terms of, you know, Black men and women, Latinx men and women, more likely to be bullied because of who has the social power, and who doesn't. A lot of this, comes down to the fact that when the bully is threatened by somebody, all they have to do is create a false narrative to weaken the image of the target, and then that becomes kind of the narrative around the person. Um, and you know, there's data out there, studies that show that there's, you know, we talk about the glass ceiling for women, but what we don't talk about is the broken rung on this ladder of, you know, who are the people in power, these predominantly white men, allowing to climb the ladder, and it's usually people who look like them. So there's a broken rung, you know, at the even at the entry level, for Black women to get ahead because of these, you know, weapons of aggression and dismissiveness from the top, to maintain the hierarchies as they are. And we're seeing bullying like happen in every industry, but it's most common, when there are low wage workers and people are, there's like a more rigid hierarchy at work. I'm thinking like manufacturing, you know, when you have like factory workers. But the kind of next, um, next more common area is social services, where, you know, healthcare is the number one industry for workplace bullying, followed by education, both higher ed. We hear all the time from people in higher ed having experienced this, but also K through 12, nonprofits, government employees. I know in my early years of working on this issue, I really like was kind of baffled by, you know, I was like, is it because these are female dominated industries, or like, why is this? And you know, found something that really made sense to me is that when you have people who are focused on power and control, and these are the people who, um, you know, make sure that they climb the ladder to gain that power and control, um, that can often blindside people who are there to make an impact. So if you think about nurses and teachers and people who, like, they're there to make an impact on the world and not pay attention to the politics. They're not there for their own personal agendas, like the people focused on power and control would be, but they're focused on the organizational agenda, the mission of the mission of the organization. And so if they believe that other people are there for the same reason, then um, they are often blindsided by these, you know, power and control tactics. And it's often why we see um, post-traumatic stress disorder with this, because people believe, you know, the people that this is often happening to are the people who believe in a just world, and who don't expect people to behave in that way. So it can be, yeah, really traumatizing for the people who've gone through it.
Deb, I know, like, I read a couple years ago when it happened about the Evan Seyfried case, and the allegations in that, which were absolutely horrific. And I know that goes beyond what we're talking about into criminal activity. I mean, stalking, conspiracy, things of that nature. Have you found that? Because I was shocked to find that that's actually, it might not be common, but that's not the first experience I've heard with that, where they will actually take it to a criminal level outside of the workplace. Have you found something that's very common? Is that is rare? Does it usually something happen before it ever gets to that extreme? I hope I'm making some sense, but I have actually heard of that level of extreme happening more than to just him, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I haven't seen any like data on how much these situations can escalate. I've seen data on sort of more of the common tactics that are used, but I have heard other stories of, um, you know, people, whether it's HR people or administrators at organizations showing up at people's homes, people feeling followed by people.
Oh.
And, you know, I don't know. I can't say that they're common, but they may be more common than we think. I
Right.
know that a lot of, you know, situations where if the organization is just set out to kind of squash the issue, make the person go away, and, you know, just sweep the whole thing under the rug, then um, some of these scare tactics that they use, you know, ways to intimidate people. I have heard multiple stories of organizations just taking it that far, of just doing whatever they can to use their resources to silence the person.
That was what I was going to ask you, is what is sort of the end game to that? I mean, there was a case in the news where I think there were some employees from eBay were stalking this couple, and they got GPS devices on their cars, and they were sending them cockroaches in the mail. I mean, I mean, what is the end game? I mean, the employees went to jail from what I understand. I can't even fathom conspiring to do something like that to a person and not at the very least be afraid that I'm going to go to jail.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
hard to kind of get in the mind of the people who perpetrate these things, but
yeah,
it does seem like, once they're fixated on power and control, it just, like greed, I guess, for it just takes over and can become all consuming. And I think some people who like misuse their power are just satisfied with the person going away and it doesn't feel like they're a threat anymore. But I could see in some situations some of these people just getting caught up in it, carried away with it, trying to punish people. I mean, um, I think like on just other abusive levels, or just other ways of abusing. I think like I always think of like Lance Armstrong and hearing horror stories of like the levels he would take, retaliating against people too. Of just if there was any threat of him having consequences for his behavior, he would just use all of his power and money to just squash that person. And I think some people are just capable of that. That's what their priority is power. So um yeah, it's unfortunate that people take it that far.
right. And Deb, oh, now that we're on that, are there any red flags? Like I know you and I are sort of in this space and we've had experience with this personally. So now we can, going forward into a job, maybe see that and walk away a lot quicker than maybe we did the first time, or maybe other people um, are. Are there red flags that you would say, okay, if you see this going on, you may want to really start to pay attention to this? Like, or is there tons?
It can be a challenge. I know in my particular situation, and later found out this was also textbook. My bully was very charming. There was a point where I thought like I would love for her to be my supervisor. She was, a higher up, but wasn't my direct supervisor. And, you know, things started to slowly shift until they kind of became a turn 180 degrees. So it's not always easy to see the signs. In cases where the person isn't charming, in the first, say, 6 months or so, although that could be a red flag that it's sort of too good to be true with the person. Other signs might just be that the work culture is chaotic, that people sort of thrive on chaos. I think if you start to feel less than in any way, you start to feel devalued or put down, or you think to yourself like they could have handled this in this more productive, positive way, even if it was a negative thing to handle. If they were trying to give constructive feedback, and they didn't do it in a respectful way, you know, I think really listening to your gut and really thinking, I'm not feeling supported here. I'm not feeling like I came into this job um, to make a difference or to like feel valued and feel supported, and that's not what's happening here. Um, I think that overall, in the big picture, that's really the biggest sign that something's off. Um, the chaos or the patronizing tone of a boss, those can be signs. But I think a lot of people also, you know I think what can be a huge challenge with this issue is that a lot of the false narratives can happen behind closed doors. Like a lot of people are like, how do I know that these conversations are happening and what do I do about it? And in reality, I mean, people aren't going to tell us that they're having these conversations of bad mouthing us, and
Yeah.
that if that's the tactic of choice, and you know, by the time we catch on that something's happening, maybe we're feeling ostracized in our department, um, that narrative has already kind of taken teeth with people and kind of become the overarching narrative, and it's really hard to bounce back from it. It's hard to know what's being said.
Right.
Sometimes we can find an ally who's willing to tell us, but it's hard to, it's hard for people to even stick their necks out on the line for fear of becoming the next target and losing their ability to pay their bills and feed their families. So, um, but I would say in general that feeling, where it just feels chaotic, things aren't getting addressed. There's a lot, can see dysfunction, um, not feeling supported by your boss, or maybe there's like a culture of gossip, just all of these things that are just unnecessary to um, a healthy and productive workplace where people want to come in, feel supported, feel like they're in control of their jobs. Any kind of sign against that is a pretty good sign that there's toxicity there, and bullying or potential bullying.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Deb. And is some of the work you do sort of talking with people to determine if that's even a situation they want to stay in, or maybe make a plan, similar to domestic violence situation, maybe make a plan to start looking at alternatives to working there or getting out of the situation? Is that a part of what you do in your work?
It's part of what I do as a coach,
Amazing.
through Dignity Together, which is separate from end workplace abuse, but we're where we focus entirely on legislation. We are talking about adding support services in, but I think a lot of people do struggle with the idea that they love the work that they're doing, they just don't love the culture or their boss. And um, my feelings on that are that the boss and the work culture are part of the job. They're all three of those things are components of the job. And if you love your work, and yes, you deserve to be the one to stay, um, it's still not a safe environment for you. So, as a coach, when I talk with people about that aspect, um, we talk about things that can be done in the short term of trying to detach from the situation. I think that occasionally there will be some times where people um, don't realize that there might be some self-awareness things that can be done. I think for the most part, it is a situation where the I mean, abuse is abuse, and that sits squarely on the shoulders of the abuser. And sometimes the question can be like, are we being abusive as part of this, or did we do something to start it? Most of the time, the answer is no to that. And I think we've been kind of conditioned in a lot of cases to explore like what we're contributing to it to cause it, and because we're being gaslit, we're blaming ourselves because somebody else is blaming us for it. But I think as we can get clearer on what's truly happening, there's no, just like with domestic abuse situations, it's hard to leave. There are you know economic reasons to stay in a lot of situations. Every case is different, but we also know that long term these situations are not good for our health. So um i I have never heard of a situation where there was a reason to stay when somebody felt like they were being abused. There are certainly short-term reasons to stay. Maybe people have bills to pay, and it takes time to find another job, or whatever sort of safety net just like if you were gonna get a divorce, there's a safety net to be built. You have
Right.
to figure out like where you're gonna live, or is it even safe to leave? So I think that long term, it's it's always beneficial to leave these types of situations, because life's too short. It's even in my personal situation, I everyone's different in terms of like wanting to fight back and change the system, and that's what we're certainly trying to do through legislation. But I also think that there is because life is short, tending to what our values are and what's going to be safe for us is really what is important. And I know in my situation, I was like, do I keep fighting this? Like, and I'm one person against this, large university. And like, how am I possibly going to win against them? Even if I put every ounce of my, you know, money and time into fighting them, like, why am I going to give them that power to squash me even more than they already have? So, um, in my case, I decided that like, I want to better understand my values. I want to um, intentionally carve out a life that aligns with my values. And I just like these people who are all about power and control. Like, I just don't, it's not worth my mental health and by extension, my physical health to give any more time to people who just don't deserve it. I mean, part of what happens with power and control is like reaction and time devoted to them,
Yeah.
um, fuels them. So I think, of course, in fighting for legislation, we want people to have a tool to be able to do that if that's what they want to do, but also recognizing that, just like a toxic friendship, or just there comes a time when it's not worth the effort being put in, and you really have to decide like what do I value here, and what am I going to spend my time on this planet like putting my energy into. So that's kind of where um typically we'll focus. But with this, with clients, or even in the advocacy work of like helping people understand that they have options. They're usually a slate of pretty um, disempowering options, like, but, there are options and they don't always have to be legal. But, it's sort of a case by case situation, but definitely not staying in a situation that's toxic is, you know, always going to benefit the target.
Sure. Thanks, Deb. And I really appreciate that. And just for that, to put the hope out there, because I have seen the silver lining. Do you ever see the people who, they're so scared to leave, they're so scared about what they're going to do, they do leave and they're so worried, but a couple of years later they're doing great, and they're in a happier place and they're thriving. Is there anything you can say to that? Do you see these stories?
Yeah,
Is there hope?
absolutely. There's
Yeah.
definitely hope. I think I think it, we definitely hear stories of people who, you know, we hear a lot of people say, I wish I'd left sooner because now I'm in this great place. And, it was just that situation. We also hear people, you know, I think the longer you stay in a toxic situation, the harder or the longer it can take to heal. I think there's a lot of self blame when people say, I should have seen the signs earlier. I should have left earlier. But we can't, we have no idea that these are things until we like they show up in our lives. So, I think that whenever we discover that it is a problem, that we've done something for ourselves to get out of it, I think, that's always a good thing. So long as, we're able to meet our basic needs. But there is, yeah, like I said, there have been plenty of stories of people who um, take the opportunity to really realize, like, what do I want? How can I like carve out my life intentionally? How can I get to a place that does serve my well-being? And um, some people are like living their best lives after this experience. They've taken some time to heal, and they, you know, have kind of learned to put themselves and their needs first, and not buy into the drama and the false narratives and the insecurities from bosses. I know in my own personal experience, there was a lot of sort of not tending to people's feelings. I didn't feel heard as a kid, and I felt like there were family members whose judgment was more was presented as more like important than my own, or more accurate, or I felt like I couldn't trust my own judgment and my own feelings, and these weren't things that weren't talked about. And I found myself being focused on approval from others, and doing the right thing because it was the right thing, but also because it would gain approval from people. And I don't wish workplace bullying on anyone, but I did, from my own experience, I think it sort of forced me to look at that upbringing and in these ways that I was thinking about myself in relationship to the world. And I think the workplace bullying experience taught me that, like, my values are what should be, carving out, being used to carve out my life, and not like what a boss thinks of me, or what someone thinks I should be doing with my life. And I know it was a really like important lesson for me to learn. But I think that the I often call that in the mental health space post-traumatic growth. And I think that if people look at these situations of like, what can I learn from this? And maybe there is nothing, maybe it's sort of a one-off situation, but maybe it plays into sort of a bigger, you know, a bigger shift in someone's life of like, this affected me, and it would affect anyone because it's a traumatic experience, but this affected me to this degree because of my relationship to power. And so I think having that opportunity to analyze it can give people hope. And like I said, an opportunity to say, like, what do I want, and what will I not tolerate, not just from work, but from like life in general, and who I decide is in my day-to-day space. And I think that at least for me, and I see that happen with other people, there's a big opportunity to analyze that, and then to feel free from that, and to a lot of people do live their best lives after this experience, so there is definitely hope.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for expanding on that. I've seen that too. And sort of switching sides here for a second. Do you ever hear from, I'm curious to know if you ever hear from or assist employers? Like if they're like, I want a functional organization. I don't want this nonsense going on. So I'm at the top. So from the top down, I want like this isn't going to happen. Like, do you ever do organizational trainings do you hear from employers that are interested in this type of work as well?
I do have a course. I've focused mostly on the target side, but I do have a course for employers. Through our work with End Workplace Abuse, we have people who have consulting backgrounds who we're still trying to figure out this piece of it, but there are that is the space we're trying to get into more of, you know, looking at this from multiple angles, that I tend to see it as, there are the organizations who want to do the right thing and who understand that, people are their best assets. And
Right.
then there's this group of, I guess, on the other spectrum of people who are all, or employers who are all about power and control and corruption and like nothing, um that's more who the legislation will serve. And there's kind of this group in the middle who want to do the right thing and don't necessarily know where to start or what they should be doing. And I think that training those people in those organizations will really help move the needle on this issue. You know, I don't think all bullies are necessarily, we stay away from intent in the legislation, but I don't think that they are necessarily ill-intended. Some can just like not know what they're doing. They might just not be trained, and they might, you know, without some kind of structure to what they're doing, they might just go into kind of a default mode and react to things instead of being proactive, and just not realize that the culture that they create will, or creating a I wouldn't say positive culture, but a respectful culture will actually help, their bottom line and help people be more productive and creative. So I think that is a major piece of this. We do still see that we need accountability in place with the organizations who just sort of refuse to care about well-being. But I think, yeah, addressing the employer side is important for those who care about, having better workplaces.
Right. Right. That you kind of answered. It was going to be my next question, Deb, about what end workplace abuse and dignity together, like what the upcoming projects are, where you see your yourself moving forward in the next coming while.
uh, so with end workplace abuse, we started about a couple of years ago. We really wanted to create a space that um, was built on, you know, equity and building leaders and um, creating safe spaces and walking the talk as much as we could. We're all like functioning within this oppressive culture, depending on who we are, or for everyone really. Um, but really trying to be mindful of that and do what we can to make these spaces equitable. Um, and so our focus has been on the legislation. We've had the bill, or a previous version of the bill that is still pretty much in line with what we have now, a newer version. We've introduced that in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We passed the Senate Labor Committee and the Senate in Rhode Island. And then in Massachusetts, we had this outpouring of support. We had about 40 experts and high profile advocates testify, including Gretchen Carlson, who went up against Fox News, Rowena Chu, who's a Harvey Weinstein survivor. We did trainings earlier this year to get new states involved, and we constantly have people, reaching out to us asking how they can get involved. We have about 20 states working on trying to find lead sponsors for 2025. So a state legislator to introduce the bill in their states. We're hoping to have at least a handful more bills to announce in 2025. We have as part of that, we're trying to create an event, in addition to Evan Zeifried and a handful of other, or more than a handful of other people who've taken their lives from this issue. Last year, or this year, earlier this year, Dr. Candia Bailey from Lincoln University took her life from this issue. And so we want to publicly do something to acknowledge the fact that Lincoln University has not done anything adequate to address that, policed themselves in that situation. So, and then we're also looking towards, kind of expanding our marketing, but also, because a lot of this is awareness building. Like, we are focused on creating a movement to, especially give relief to people who are going through this. But like, even if somebody hasn't, at least when they do go through it, they'll have a name to call it. And so we would love to be able to give support services to people who are going through this. We're still in the very early stages of exploring what that will be, but thinking of like peer support groups, mentorships, things like that. And then with Dignity Together, I'm continuing to do individual coaching, group coaching around this issue. I think a lot of people, not just for workplace abuse, but for trauma in general, it can, because we blame ourselves so much and make these things an individual problem, we tend to isolate and like mistrust the world. And but I think the big antidote to trauma is connection, like taking ourselves out of that isolation, which is really hard to do. And
Wow.
I think that's where the group coaching has been really helpful for people to see, like, oh, this is not me. This is a bigger system, like I said. And like, hearing other people's stories can really help me see the playbook and detach from what I experienced. And it's not this sort of wave a magic wand and heal, but I think people feel just much more understood, and much more like connected to people who get it. And so I think that the group work has been really valuable with this issue. So, yeah, plugging away at the awareness building and the legislation, and using the legislation as a tool for awareness building and healing through advocacy is what we're just,
Excellent.
continuing to try to grow.
Amazing. And actually, you kind of really answered the the last question I had here is, I'm in Canada, you're in the States. I found you. In my experience with this, like, I've talked to people from all over the world. Do you work with people outside of the States as well? Do you work with people internationally? Have you found that as well? Or are you mostly concentrated to the States?
We're mostly concentrated to the States just because that's where we understand the legal scheme of things. We have had
Right.
people in Canada contact us, and we just haven't made things work, but we would love to like extend introducing this bill into the Canadian provinces. We've been, like, we have people contact us from around the world, and we just don't have the bandwidth to like really understand the landscape in more than that. But we are connected with somebody who's doing similar work in the UK, who we connect people with. So we're trying to like manage what we can, but still get people to the right resources depending on where they are. So.
Amazing. And I guess my last question would be, Deb, is, you're doing, this is such amazing work. And I think, how can people, if they're watching this and they want to support your work, how is the best way for somebody to support this work, really.
Yeah, I mean, people can support on all sorts of different levels. The first, they can go to endworkplaceabuse.com, and um in the drop down, I think it's under psychological abuse, they'll see a link to take action. And they can do anything from signing a petition to stay connected with us, to hear about more actions in the future, to sharing our messages on social media, to like getting more involved. We have a bunch of roles listed on our website, and a varying, level or degrees of time spent. We still have a number of states that we're trying to find bill directors in, a bunch of marketing roles to fill. We're all volunteers. And then also, if people have ideas, if they're like, we should be doing this and we've never thought about it, we would love to have conversations with people and see like what experience and skills they'd love to bring to this. So we're really, grassroots, but people can get involved at any level. I think even just, at a minimum, sharing that this is a thing and that there's ways for people to take their voices back, is always helpful. Like I think the power of knowing that we can really provide relief for somebody, that like not just knowing that workplace abuse is a term, but like there's a whole bunch of us doing something about it, and they can be part of that, depending on where people are in their healing journey, or if they're still at a toxic workplace, I think can be really powerful. And I think that's what I often remind myself of, like, if one person got some relief from this thing that we tried, we reach one new person who felt some weight lifted off their shoulders, then that's really all we can ask for, is kind of like building this movement one person at a time. And so yeah, people want to help on any level. We have a really active LinkedIn. We're active on all social media accounts, but especially LinkedIn. Anything
Perfect.
people can do to spread the word is helpful.
Perfect. And will you still be continuing with the podcast as well, Deb?
I haven't done as much with my podcast, but anytime like people reach out with their stories, I'm always eager to like jump on and add a new episode. I think I think it's important to keep sharing stories and to help people see the nuances of things, but also just how similar these abuses of power are. So
your podcast I found incredibly helpful. I've listened to, I think, every episode on it. It's amazing. And I'm really glad, Deb, that I found you, and I'm really grateful you took the time to speak to me, and you've taught me a lot in this hour, and I'm really, really grateful for the work that you're doing on this. I'm so glad that I found you, and just thank you so much for everything, and thank you for your time in this. And just everyone, I'm going to put the links in. It needs to go check out your podcast and your work, and will not be disappointed in the least. Thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you so much. Thanks for getting the word out about this. It's really helpful.
It's time.
Yeah.